Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm Dalton Crawford, and I'm here with Pastor Judy Templeton. If you have not had an opportunity to read Reflections 2, a blog, I encourage you to do so. It's a remarkable piece of work, and within it lies the ability for you to unlock some of the things that Pastor went through. And she's been very candid in opening herself up in these blogs. Pastor, if you're able, I'd love to ask you some questions in reference to Reflections 2.
Okay.
All right. I think the first thing that comes to mind is the series of events that led up to what we understand to be the greater part of the blog, which is the baptismal.
Mm-hmm.
With something that was so chronically impossible that it became possible. Perhaps you can share with us the events that led up to that being possible.
Well, as far as I was concerned, it was impossible.
Yes.
So when I usually called my pastors once a week, and so this happened to be one evening when I was calling them, and my pastor, Larry in Hawaii, he answered the phone, and usually he just hands it to the to Josie, and so it was just kind of funny. He goes, "I want to talk to you," and it's like, "Oh, okay," and he goes, "Well, God told me you need to do water baptism." I'm thinking, "Oh my gosh, this guy's nuts. Does he know where I'm at? I'm in prison. What is he thinking?" Well, you know, and you don't really argue with Pastor Larry. You just go, So I did his normal, and hopefully he'd get off the phone. And so we did, and I never gave it another consideration. But a couple weeks later, I happened to be free one evening to be able to go to the evening Bible study, which I hadn't been to, and now I've been there almost a year, a little over a year. And so as I went to this evening, I kind of stood in the back, and there's probably like 75 women in it, so it's quite big. And at the end of it, the pastor who was leading it said, I want to talk to you, would you stay behind? And I'm thinking, what does he want? I don't even know this person. I've never even said hello to him. And so he goes, I heard you work in the maintenance department. And well, yeah, I paint. I'm a painter in part of the maintenance part. And so he goes, well, I want to ask you if you could, build a water baptism. And I'm thinking, are these guys nuts? He knows how hard it is in the Bureau of Prison. You can't bring even paperwork in that you want to bring in. So, he's saying, well, no, we've been praying and we want you to build a water baptism. And he wasn't going to let me go. And so until I promised that I would at least try by asking. So I could go back to my unit. I said, yes, I will do it. And of course, my prayer partner was with me, who just never lets anything drop. So she just started bugging me, what day are you going to ask, what day? And so by Thursday, I finally got up the courage to walk into this room where they're at, which is like, you don't ever talk to them. You just don't. And I walked in, and I thought, okay, of the two, that one looks easier. Man, that's me. So I approach him and say, I'm sorry to interrupt, but would you consider me building a water baptism? Absolutely not. So I turned right around and walked right out, and the guy that was over him said, wait a minute. He says, what do you need? And then so I told him what I needed. What's the size you need? And he goes, I will have the men build it, and you'll have it by the end of the week. I'm thinking, I didn't see that coming. I had no idea how God could put something together. I was just in shock.
Wow. It's amazing to see, how God uses people. And no matter where you are, if you're able, you find yourself being used. How did you feel when all of this came together?
I was excited because there were so many people that my prayer partner and I had led a Bible study in our unit every night and prayed. And so a lot of people had come to the Lord, and during that people were getting healed and baptized in the Holy Spirit. But the consideration to never do a water baptism just never came up because that was impossible. And so I was just shocked that God could do it. I always thought of it as a great story to be able to share when I finally got out, and just how awesome God is. But not until I started doing the reflection did I really start to understand how God put all the pieces together, and not understanding the favor of God that's on me. As I was teaching Joseph, the book of Joseph, for a lot of times, and seeing the favor of God, it was like, who would have expected an inmate? I mean, even though we know the story, who would expect, the pits of the world to have favor of not only the head foreman, but actually the warden?
Yes.
And the things that were going on started to make me understand, because of the work ethics that I had as a prisoner. Well, they were for the Lord. And so I did them unto the Lord, never expecting anybody to notice anything. I mean, that was not even in my vocabulary or thoughts. But the favor of God that went before me, and realizing how God uses his favor, was just a huge reflection for me over the years.
The event makes one think a miracle had just happened, without a doubt. And when you study the repercussions of it, there are a lot of takeaways from it, both for you and also for the individuals that were actually baptized. I know that in other conversations, I had asked whether or not you'd stayed in touch with some of those people. Had you?
I hadn't until a few years ago, when God asked me to start writing a book, and then he brought my prayer partner, who I had no clue where she was at, contacted me about 4 years ago. And so, we got together, because she's in Florida. Heck, if I knew where she was at. But she came from a Word of Faith, a huge church there. And so it made sense why God put us together, because we believed the same things. We were both in the Spirit-filled, Word-filled church. But more than that, she filled in a lot of pieces. She brought with her an article, and the article in the newspaper was first baptism in ever at this prison. And from what I understand, because we connected with one other prisoner who just got out a few years ago, that was the last. So it was a first and last. But then you think about that church that had prayed so long and believed so long that they could do a water baptism, the answer to their prayers, the encouragement that gave them. It wasn't just the people we water baptized, which was awesome. And most of them, from my understanding, still serve the Lord even as they've gotten out. But more than that is just how God put all these pieces together I was going to quit that job a month earlier. I had thought about, everybody's trying to talk me into, you always have paint all over you. Get a job in the accounting office, you do accounting really well, and it's like, I don't want to sit, I want to just, be busy. And so how close I came to stepping out of that position. So how God creates divine appointments, and everything's in his perfect timing. We take that for granted, but there were so many moving pieces that could have changed if we went by what we felt. And so I look back and I think, wow, it's bigger of a miracle than I even imagined it was.
Yeah, there are. Even as you're talking now, I'm seeing so many different avenues, so many different takeaways. To everyone listening to this story, it could mean so many different things from a dimensional standpoint. And it just makes me realize how amazing God is. That no matter what he reaches in, and no matter how broke or how absurd it may be, there's a way around that. I just wonder, one last question, if I may. As a narrative, how would you speak to the individuals listening to this conversation who perhaps have read Reflections 2 and are trying to figure out the sense of all of that?
Well, I named it God Doing the Impossible, and I think, coming into a new year and coming out of 2 years, we see the impossibilities of what's going on. We see that life is not going to go back to the same way. We see all these different things that are going on in our world, and you say, well, why this story now? Because I think we need to believe that God is making sense out of all this. And that what we don't see as possible, what we see that we've lost, is God says, I was a prisoner. I mean, give me a break. I'm at the slum of the world at this point, and to think that God would use me, well, God uses all of us.
Yeah.
And we think, well, who am I for God to use? And he says,
yeah,
just be available.
Yeah.
I can do an impossible thing in your life, and I can make miracles go all around you if you allow me to use you. And so that was kind of what I was taking away, is like, I just want to inspire people that it doesn't matter your situation, it doesn't matter if you're broke, it doesn't matter if you're homeless, but God can use you right where you're at. Yeah. And those impossible, you know, I've shared this before, I was supposed to be there for 9 years, then God released me a month later, you know, and in that month, God kind of wrapped everything up. But he gave me the amazing gift of being allowed to be used by him. And it was the beginning of my teaching. And so, you know, sometimes we're waiting. We're waiting when everything's all right, everything's all together to be used of God. And my hope is that through these reflections is to understand that he wants to use you right where you're at. He's not waiting for you to get all cleaned up. He's not waiting for any of that. He's just saying, hey, are you available? Yeah. Are you available? Are you willing? Yeah. And what you think is impossible, just keep going, because I'm going to make this beautiful picture out of it. Yeah. And so for me, the water baptism, just, you know, death and being risen again, you know, just the whole analogy of water baptism, die to the old and new to the becoming a new creation, is like, well, that was kind of what God did with my life, you know, and I think he does that with all our lives, but we're too big of a hurry. We're like, hurry up, God. And a lot of the revelations or the reflections that I bring up is, as I've been looking back trying to write this book, God just shows me just his amazing hand in not only that time, but how he's used all that time to build and build and build. And so we need to be kind of patient. I say kind of because we're not all good at that. Yeah. But really, you know, allow him to mold us and build us to the person he created us to be. And it's never too late.
Pastor, this is, I think, an important work, and reflections are showing us, giving us an opportunity to see his handiwork. And I think that if we can just learn how to be patient, we see this handiwork showing up in our lives. The events in prison are extraordinary, but there are events that are smaller that are happening in all of our lives. With your boldness, you're showing us, teaching us how to look deeper into those scenarios that show up, and maybe we'll become a little bit better than who we are trying to become in his perfect will. I thank you for your encouragement. If you have not had an opportunity to read Reflections 2, I do encourage you to take the time and read it. You will not be wasting your time. Thank you for sharing your afternoon with us. We look forward to the next one. Thank you, Pastor.
Thank you, Dalton.